angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog, and yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, as Keir Starmer tries to make voters forget his attempts to overturn the biggest Democratic vote in history.
Under Labour, Britain will not go back into the EU. We will not be joining the single market or the customs union.
Yeah, right. Is this man really just a puppet for a bloke who will never give up on reversing Brexit, Sir Tony Blair? I'll explore in my digest next why a Labour Party in power could mark the beginning of a dreaded Blair comeback. Then I'll get my reactions from my superstar panel, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the newspaper and Blair groupie Benjamin Butterworth, and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. Plus, what does the architect of our unshackling from the EU think of Starmer's plan to, quote, make Brexit work? Well, Nigel Farage gives his verdict first and live at 9:40. Why has the British mainstream media ignored the victims of vaccine damage? I'll speak to the man leading the charge for justice, Mark Stein. Plus, we'll discover a little bit more about the incredible backstory of the GB News favourite. You don't want to miss it. Mark Stein, finally live with me at 10:15. Plus, as the MSM launch a new scare campaign and Jenny Harries calls for the return of measures including social distancing and face masks, my God, are we actually being readied for another round of vaccines? We'll debate that at 10. And as the president of Brazil reveals why he didn't take the COVID jab, will the first major world leader speaking out encourage more debate around the efficacy of the vaccines? Neil Oliver thinks so. He's tonight's Outsider at 9:50. After Halifax prioritises pronoun badges and gender ideology over its loyal customers, why are corporations trying to shove wokism down our throats? The former face of Halifax, Howard Brown, gives his ex-employer a reality check and uncancelled at 10:40. Amid listener outrage and claims of ageism, is the BBC wrong to replace Steve Wright with Scott Mills on Radio 2? Well, former BBC DJs Mike Reid and David Hamilton and ex-Blue Peter presenter Peter Purvis, all legends, do battle in the clash at 9:25. Want your thoughts on this one too. Plus, is it right to make single-sex toilets compulsory in new public buildings? And they're back.
I want to work in the arts, not disrupt them. But the situation we're in means that we have to do everything non-violently possible to prevent the civilizational collapse that we are hurtling towards.
God help me. The eco-terrorists have just stopped oil, proving once again they're a pain in the art. But which celebrity wokey has come out in favour of their antics? I'll tell you who and reveal all of that in the media buzz throughout the 10 hour. Plus, first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages as they drop. And as ever, I'll round out the show by crowning the first greatest Briton and Union jackass of the week. This is Dan Wootton Tonight. Let's go. Just one thing first, I know lots of people at Westminster are excitedly talking about their summer recess coming up. Well, I want to assure you we're having no summer recess here on this show in 2022. There's just too much at stake. Too many important issues in the news, a cost of living crisis, COVID hysterics trying to take hold again, and a Westminster witch hunt to force out our democratically elected Prime Minister Boris Johnson, to name just three. So stick with us throughout the next 2 months of summer. Westminster might be shutting down, but we're not going anywhere. My superstar panel tackle the revolting Tony Blair comeback imminently. Tonight, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone is here, senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butterworth too, and the former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. But first, the news headlines at 9 with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Dan. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. President Biden says he's offered the full support of the federal government after a gunman killed 6 people in the US city of Chicago. Police are still looking for the suspect who opened fire during a 4th of July parade in a wealthy suburb. A high-powered rifle believed to have been used in the attack has been recovered from the rooftop of a building overlooking the parade. The suspect is thought to be aged between 18 and 20. Close to 30 people have now been taken to hospital. Mayor of Highland Park, Nancy Rotering, says the community has been torn apart.
Our hearts go out to the families of the victims during this devastating time. On a day that we came together to celebrate community and freedom, we're instead mourning the tragic loss of life and struggling with the terror that was brought upon us.
At least one person has died following a gas explosion at a block of flats in Bedford. 3 others were taken to hospital, with witnesses describing the scene in the Redwood Grove area as an inferno. One person was seen jumping from a second-floor window to escape the blaze. East of England Ambulance Service says a man was airlifted with serious leg injuries. 2 other people, including a firefighter, were taken to hospital suffering from smoke inhalation. The man accused of shooting dead 3 people at a shopping centre in Copenhagen has been remanded in custody and will undergo a psychiatric evaluation. 2 teenagers were among those killed and 7 others were wounded, 4 of them seriously during the attack yesterday. Danish police say there's no evidence to suggest the incident was terror-related. Labour's deputy leader says Boris Johnson should have properly investigated rumours about Chris Pincher before promoting him to deputy chief whip. It comes after Downing Street revealed the Prime Minister was aware of speculations but did not think it appropriate to block his appointment. Chris Pincher was suspended from the Conservative Party and resigned after claims emerged that he'd groped 2 men last week. 6 new allegations have emerged since, all of which Mr Pincher denies. Angela Rayner says Boris Johnson should have asked questions.
I mean, it sounds like a logical thing to do, but you ask, don't you? There's rumours flying around. Can I ask you the question, is there anything that you've done that could be considered? And I would have investigated them. If I was the Prime Minister and somebody had said that, I'd have said, you know, these rumours, that's really serious. I want it investigating. I want to find out if there's any truth to it. I think that's a logical thing.
On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Dan Wootton tonight.
So, slippery Starmer is in full damage control tonight, for very good reason. The bloke's been found out, his true motives exposed, the chaos and havoc he would unleash on the country in a Ramona coalition with the SNP, Greens and Lib Dems. Well, that's starting to sink in. The union itself is at threat in the socialist hellscape of the future. Of course, this could all turn out to be academic if the Durham police follow the law and issue Labour's troubled leader with a fixed penalty notice for ignoring the ludicrous lockdown rules he strongly supported. But for now, Starmer remains in post, plotting a plan to convince us all that we should discount his previous words on Brexit and believe him that he would spurn a dirty deal with the SNP.
And is also stuck with a government that has no plan. One that was elected on a promise to get Brexit done, but has now decided to reopen those old divisions in order to ensure Britain remains stuck with this failed Prime Minister. But whilst the Conservatives are playing around, Labour has been claiming the centre ground of British politics once again.
What's most worrying to me is the figure who menacingly lurks behind the scenes in this scenario, pulling Starmer's strings. One Sir Tony Blair, who will never give up on the idea of reversing Brexit. It's a horrific thought, but Blair views his Future of Britain group, they all gathered last week, as a way to bring together the likes of Rory Stewart and Patricia Hewitt and Andrew Adonis and Gina Miller, all arch Ramonas, to, quote, prepare for a new world.
Britain faces challenges that are unprecedented in recent times. Some, like the technology revolution and achieving net zero, we share with other nations. Some, like Brexit, are unique to Britain. But with the cost of living crisis and the shadow of recession looming, We can't afford to continue as we are. We need to plan and prepare for a new world, and this is our way of starting.
Now, senior Tories quite rightly fear a PM Starmer would simply operate as a chief executive for El Presidente Blair. Details of Blair's disturbing plan were revealed by his close pal and establishment favourite, Andrew Neil. No, me neither. At the weekend, he wrote in the Daily Mail, Tony Blair has a new mission: to be the mastermind behind a centre-left government that would replace the ailing Tory administration of Boris Johnson at the next election. Neil went on to say that Blair has concluded that Labour under Keir Starmer is highly unlikely to win an overall majority, so he wants to ape the German centre-left government of the Social Democrats, Greens and Free Democrat Liberals. Here it would feature Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens. Neil added, better to start now on the sort of policy agenda that could bring them together, not in a formal David Cameron-Nick Clegg coalition, but in a working arrangement in which certain key policies are agreed. How better his legacy would look if he could be the guiding hand behind a new Blairism 2.0 for the 2020s. Disturbingly, Neil writes that Blair will, quote, attempt somewhere down the road to overturn the vote to leave the EU, the biggest democratic mandate in British history. While this sort of socialist centre putting Brexit and the Union at stake if the SNP have to get involved too seems perfectly palatable to Andrew Neil, that's my idea of hell. As Trevor Kavanagh writes in The Sun today, Blair may be despised by many, but he remains a beguiling figure for New Labour, Long Marchers, the BBC and shadowy common purpose influencers who operate below the radar within the public service blob. Blair thinks the time is ripe for a new political movement, perhaps under the Labour Party umbrella, but with himself as backseat driver. This is a dagger aimed at the heart of the Conservative Party and Brexit. Blair already has the backing of Tory and Labour dissidents who might form an alliance with the Lib Dems at the next election. I really do wish Conservative rebels would get out of their own self-absorbed bubble and stop doing everything possible to bring down Boris Johnson and think of what's really at stake at the next election. Only a Tory party united around the Prime Minister can stop the prospect of Tony Blair wielding outsized influence on the future of Britain. To respond now, my superstar panel, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. So, Carol Malone, what I think you've got going on is Starmer's trying to hoodwink us all into thinking that he's given up on Brexit, and you've got Tony Blair pulling the strings behind the scenes saying, just wait, wait.
It wouldn't surprise me if Blair actually helped him write that speech today, because that's exactly... And, you know, you talked about this policy agenda that Blair wants to put together to make a Lib Dem Labour coalition palatable. He did this back, you know, right back in 1997. He was planning this then with Paddy Ashdown of the Lib Dems. But he didn't have to use it because he won with a landslide in 97, so it wasn't necessary. So this is not a new idea to him. But, you know, people can't forget what Blair is. You know, his ex-best friend, Robert Harris, says he's a narcissist with a messiah complex. He has a God complex. You just heard him talking there about a new world. And he wants...
What did he mean?
He wants to be God in that new world. We mustn't forget, you know, what he was and what he did. Anyone who remembers him at the Chilcot Inquiry will remember him talking. The man is still deluded. He was talking about Iraq like it was the right thing to do. He will not admit he made a mistake. He will never admit he made a mistake.
And he also loves, well, it used to be identity cards and now it's this whole digital ID.
Of course. And, I mean, he is going to go on and speak. He knows that the British public will not stomach him as a leader anywhere because the scars of Iraq run too deep for that. But he wants to be pulling the Starmer strings. And you know what? Starmer will grab this with both hands, because the only way he's ever going to get to be Prime Minister is if someone else is pulling the strings. And I'm really scared by this, because I think Blair's a very dangerous man. You know, you remember when he was in power, we heard stories about how he never listened to his cabinet. He didn't listen to anyone. And this is what he's going to do now. And it's actually thwarting democracy.
It is.
And
that's what he wants.
That's what he wants. But I'm really hoping the British public see this for what it is and react.
Well, Belinda Lucy, on that point, I mean, you were a Brexit Party MEP. Your political mission in life was to ensure that the blob and people like Blair didn't stop the biggest democratic mandate in history. It feels that threat to me now, Belinda.
Well, Keir and Tony are cut from the same anti-democratic globalist cloth. You know, any politician that wants to sell off democratic agency to supranational entities without the consent of the people, both are I think, put the whole fabric of this country, sovereignty and democracy, at risk. I think these two men, listen, the closer they dance together, the better for the Conservative Party, because as long as those two are in cahoots, and remember in 2020, one of Keir's shadow cabinet ministers said that Blair was said that Keir was continuity Blair. So already back then there are rumblings of this sort of puppet of Blair's. The problem is that, you know, we had under Blair, he oversaw not just the horrific atrocities that happened in Iraq and the creation, and therefore the creation of ISIS and all the problems we've had from that. He oversaw the Human Rights Act that gives foreign criminals more right to stay here than the victims had of getting rid of them. He oversaw the civil service becoming this horrendous politicised blob. This is all under Tony Blair, and Keir loves it. And they do not trust the people with democracy. They want the EU to be the safeguard between the people and the democracy, because they hate
Belinda,
democracy.
remember, it was Blair that precipitated Brexit because he opened the doors in 2004. He didn't have to open them in the way he did. He said 5 to 13,000 would come. 850,000 came in 7 years. And so he precipitated
he
Brexit.
didn't care.
He's responsible. No,
I mean, and it was
care.
fascinating reading his whole speech today that he delivered earlier this evening, because he's not trying to shy away from Blair's record. You know, he is embracing it. And I guess, Benjamin Butterworth, for someone like you, a massive Tony Blair groupie, this is your dream scenario. You have Starmer in power, backed up by narcissistic Blair, sort of puppet master pulling all of his strings. This is great for you. This is what you want.
I mean, look, Brexit ruined the fishing sector in this country, and yet there's so much tripe tonight.
Boris's Brexit.
I'm starting to think
how
it's
long
back.
did that think?
It took me about 2 seconds because it was so obvious the nonsense you were all talking.
Well, it's such a bad joke.
I mean, I hope there's a shrink tonight, because the paranoia coming out of you is so obvious. You know what, Tony Blair, if you believe in democracy...
Don't belittle my mental health, you woke-topian.
Tony Blair won more seats in Parliament than any other Prime Minister since the Second World War, not once but twice.
And then took us into an illegal.
Yeah. And his third majority was about the same size as the one Boris Johnson's won now, the one that you think he has a right to go carte blanche over everything else, including the laws and regulations within Parliament. So you know what? The idea that Blair was unpopular is clearly a nonsense. We live in a time now when we're going back to the 70s. Under Blair, you had education up, health outcomes up, support for the NHS up, the longest period of economic growth this country has seen. Every single quarter of his 10 years in power, you had economic growth.
I would actually
you had the lowest unemployment.
Every issue that we have in this country at the moment
and the truth
goes back to New Labour, Benjamin. Look at the issues we've got in Scotland at the moment. Look at the out-of-control SNP trying to tear apart the union.
Here he goes.
That's the fault of Blair and devolution, which was a project that failed.
The man that sits here saying you better listen to the will of the people, that now patronises those in Scotland for being able to elect their own parliament.
Well, they didn't even want to vote. They didn't even want to vote, by the way. Look at all of the recent polls. But by the way, Benjamin, the SNP said it was once in a generation. And so
that wasn't
I'll
what I was
give them
talking
another
about.
vote in a generation.
If you're going to debate, you're going to have to listen to me, because I said they deserve their own parliament, which is what he introduced. And the people of Wales, and actually I think the regional mayors, like the Mayor of London, they deserve to exist because people deserve to be closer to their democracy. You sit there lecturing about democracy and the will of the people all the time, and yet when they don't vote how you like, suddenly you're against it. What a hypocrite.
It's very interesting you talk about the SNP, you know. Just look at Scotland at the moment. The health services in the toilet.
I'm not here to defend the SNP. I don't want them to be in government. What I want is people to have the right to elect their own parliament.
The point that we're making is it's Blair's devolution policies that have created that situation. But look, Benjamin, let's get back to the number issue
was the economy
here.
better
Let's
under
get back to
Blair
the
or
number issue, which
Johnson?
is about Brexit.
Which one was it?
It's about Brexit.
Which one was it?
Because Keir Starmer is saying tonight, oh, you can trust me. Yes, I spent the entire previous election campaign when I was when I was Corbyn's Brexit spokesperson, insisting that we needed a second referendum, but you can trust me on Brexit now.
No.
But actually, it's what Blair says It's what Sadiq Khan says that reveals the true intentions of the Labour Party.
You know, Blair has lied, has Starmer over Brexit. They have both changed their mind. You know, Starmer has changed. Every 3 months, Starmer changed his mind in the lead up to the referendum about what Labour's policy was. He couldn't remember half of the time, and then he made a new one up. It's nonsense to believe what he says.
Yeah, but he wanted to overturn the vote.
Yeah.
That is the fundamental
exactly.
point. And he went to the people, Carol, saying, we will overturn the biggest democratic mandate in British history. And I cannot forget that. We know he hates Brexit. And actually, I can't bear failed London Mayor Sadiq Khan, but I think he's at least telling the truth this week.
Why do you hate democracy so much? You know, nobody has had a bigger Nobody has had a bigger single mandate in British political history than Sadiq Khan in his first term. What
about the Brexit?
Why do you think that he doesn't speak for Londoners? Because he does.
What about the Brexit mandate? This is what we're talking about.
And I don't think Brexit should be overturned. It was the will of the people.
The big thing is Keir Starmer sells himself as a saint of integrity, as a saint of honesty, and he lied about Brexit, as did many of the Labour MPs. He lied. He didn't lie about having a bit of a piece of cake in an office. He lied about respecting the most powerful democratic vote of our lifetimes and overturning. No, you say get over it. As if
get over it.
Brexit happened. No, I don't want any.
We're over it.
Why the hell should we get over it?
Oh, I'm not being funny. In this housing crisis, it's good to see Tony Blair living rent-free in your head 15 years after he left office. That's how lame your argument is, because the guy you're supporting is a charlatan.
He spent a lot of time writing these little jokes backstage. He must have known what was going to be said here. That's 2 little bad jokes he's made in the past 10 minutes.
It doesn't take a long time to dismantle Dan's rubbish arguments tonight.
Do you know what? All I would say is you watch that clip that I played of Tony Blair talking about a new world order. We don't want a new world order. We don't want him and his globalist mates tearing up everything that we have achieved with Brexit. So I'm sorry, I stand by my point. Starmer in power opens the door to Brexit being overturned, and if you think he won't be pulling the puppet strings of a Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, you are the delusional one.
Quite right.
Well, good luck with the Tories' shrinking vote share.
Belinda Lucy, Pension Butterworth, Carol Malone, thank you so much. My superstar panel in the Herald Evening. Coming up, what does the architect of our EU exit make of Starmer's plan? Nigel Farage here at 9:40. I cannot wait for that. But up next, amid listener outrage and claims of ageism, is the BBC wrong to replace Steve Wright with Scott Mills on Radio 2? Former BBC DJs Mike Reid and David Hamilton and ex-Blue Peter presenter Peter Purves do battle in the clash at 9:25. Are you on the same wavelength as my lineup? Email your thoughts to dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me using the handle @gbnews. There's a poll running there too. The results coming up after the break.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Showers easing overnight, fine for a time across Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland on Tuesday, but more rain turns up later in the day. The weather staying changeable in the north, drier further south as a ridge of high pressure begins to influence things a bit more this week. And so for some southern areas, no rain expected at all through the week, but there are showers to come for the north, and further showers are expected for northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, North Wales overnight. They will eventually mainly affect, say, northwest-facing coasts with drier and clearer spells inland. And a cool night to come, temperatures dipping in the single figures in some spots. But a bright start for the south and the east, and actually a fine day for much of Scotland and Northern England as well, and into the Midlands we'll see some sunny spells. I think cloudier weather mainly for Northern Ireland, for parts of Wales, southern England, and temperatures across the UK close to average. We're looking at high teens, low 20s. But Tuesday afternoon brings with it more rain eventually for Western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well. And that rain spreads across the rest of Scotland into Northern England, North Wales overnight. It also turns breezier in the north, but as well as seeing that rain and the cloud topple in from the northwest, we'll see warmer air arrive. So it's not going to be as cool overnight. Temperatures staying up in the teens in many spots. The brightest conditions for the start of Wednesday will be in the south, and it will stay dry here with sunny spells and a warmer feel. Further north, a lot of cloud and outbreaks of rain continuing for the north and west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, with gusty wind making it feel on the cool side. Thursday and Friday, I think, more widely drier and more settled. Still some rain in the far northwest, whilst the southeast turns hot.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation. We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
GB News giants Nigel Farage, Neil Oliver and Mark Stein all coming up on a night of big beasts. But first, it's time for the clash. Now, the BBC is caught up in a furious ageism row after axing radio DJ Steve Wright after over 2 decades. That's in favour of a younger presenter. So the 67-year-old host has been turfed from his much-loved BBC Radio 2 afternoon show in favour of 49-year-old Scott Mills because bosses want to, quote, try something different in the slot. Revealing the youth-obsessed Bib's decision live on air, the axed veteran's disappointment was palpable.
Try not to become emotional or self-indulgent. This is going to be a little bit difficult. At the end of September, I'll be taking a break from daytime radio. In other words, stepping down from this programme. At the beginning of this year, my friend and boss, Helen Thomas, head of Radio 2, said she wanted to do something different in the afternoons. Now, I've been doing this programme for 24 years at Radio 2, and so how can I possibly complain? The support and creative freedom that I'm given is fantastic at Radio 2. And really, I can't hog the slot forever.
Scott Mills fans are also up in arms as he is shunted off Radio 1, the Beeb's youth station, after 24 years. And emotional Mills and his co-host Chris Stark took to the airwaves today to address the shock reshuffle.
Exactly. I'm so proud of you. Exactly. And I'm so proud of what we've done together. Like, let's not get emotional now. That's for another time, okay? But I'm feeling weird. I'm also feeling a little bit in denial that this is actually happening. But apparently it is.
So with listeners branding the decision ageist and diabolical, was the BBC wrong to replace Steve Wright with Scott Mills on Radio 2? Let me know your thoughts. Stan at gbnews.uk, tweet me at gbnews. We've got our poll running there too. The results shortly. But I'm delighted to say we have 3 BBC legends in their own right to weigh in on this now. Former BBC Radio 1 DJ Mike Reid, ex-BBC presenter Peter Purves, and former Radio 1 and Radio 2 presenter David Hamilton. So, David, you think ageism is now sort of the only acceptable form of discrimination at the BBC?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, you can't be sexist, you can't be racist, but it seems that you can be ageist. And I think, I must say, where Steve is concerned, you know, no one has a divine right to broadcast forever. And he's had a good run, 25 years plus. He's been very well paid by the BBC, so he's not short of a bob or two. But On the other hand, listeners don't like change. And I think the presenters develop a bond with the listeners. And when they lose that microphone, it's a bit like losing friends and family. So, it's very tough when it happens.
But Mike Reid, do you think this decision is just all part of the cut and thrust of a ruthless broadcasting industry?
Yeah, it's happened over the years to everyone. I mean, when Wogan went, they said Radio 2 will never be the same. When Jimmy Young went, they said Radio 2 will never be the same. It's the king is dead, long live the king. Very much that. I mean, like any football team, they can't get rid of so-and-so, but the team continues. And I don't think it is ageist, because when you look at someone like Annie Nightingale, who's been doing programs there since 1970 and is still doing them. She's been doing programs for 52 years and is still doing them. Ken Bruce is still doing a great job as well. I mean, he was doing the breakfast show for Wogan when I was doing the breakfast show on Radio 1. So I don't think it is that. I think often, you're subject, as we all know, to the whim of a radio boss that says, do you know what? And you go, yeah, okay. And it is one of those sort of, things that just crops up every now and again.
Well, indeed. But if I was Ken Bruce right now, I'd be feeling really damn nervous. And Peter Purves, isn't the issue that the BBC seems to be purging old white blokes, no matter how popular they are?
Well, I wouldn't say that was the case across the board, but I think David hit it right on the head. Familiarity is what the audience like. And I think it's ageism, pure and simple. People like what they know. And I can't see why Radio 2 should be looking for a different audience or a change of direction. Steve Wright is an excellent radio DJ, and yes, he's had a long chat, but this chat is excellent, intelligent, and on target for a Radio 2 audience. Let's face it, there are 11 million people over the age of 65 in the UK. That's 19% of the total population. And I think that the BBC should consider catering for them and thinking about what they like. And I don't think it should be up to perhaps very young or much younger producers and directors who come in to take over certain areas of the business and putting in their own ideas when it doesn't necessarily fit the pattern of what the audience wants.
Mike Reid, that's a fair point, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, older BBC Radio 2 licence fee payers pay exactly the same amount as a youngster.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. But I think it's getting a team right as well. Any radio boss wants to get the right team, like the right football team, and have the right amount of players. But yeah, when Steve, and he'd be the first to agree with this, when Steve started on Radio 2, there was a bit of an outcry about, who is this guy with these weird characters and all these things going on? So I think, like all of us, he struggled for the first 3 or 4 months for acceptance. And we all do that. When I took over the Radio 1 breakfast show, they go, well, where's Tony Blackburn? Where's Noel Edmonds? And I remember you sliding into the seat and feeling a bit of a fraud. But you have to win them over. You have to get people gradually to say, yeah, okay, it's different. And it is different. It is a poison chalice taking over from somebody after 24 years to get in there and win people over and hope you don't lose audiences.
David Hamilton, you were actually, I believe, once told that you had lost a job at the BBC because of your age.
Well, it's happened to me a few times, to be honest with you, and probably to all of us at some time or another. I was working for Radio 1, and the controller said to me one day, he said, I'm going to let you go on a free transfer to Radio 2. I said, well, that's very kind of you. I said, why is that? Why would I be leaving Radio 1? Because at that particular time, Radio 1 was the big pop station in the country. So he said, well, basically, it's a thing of age. So I looked at him. He was wearing a pinstripe suit. I remember that. He was about 15 years older than me. And I knew that his taste in music was The Sound of Music and South Pacific. And my inclination was to say to him, if anybody's too old for the job, it's you, mate. But of course, you don't speak to bosses like that. And of course, I didn't want to be ageist, so I just zipped it.
Very, very good anecdote. I mean, Peter Purves, what seems so interesting to me is that the BBC was clearly embarrassed about Radio 2. If you remember back about 3 or 4 years ago, there are a whole load of stories about how the lineup was old and white. And so they have purposefully set about to reinvent the station. It's actually led to loads of disasters, though, with the audience. Do you remember they enforced the brilliant Simon Mayo to take a female co-presenter in Jo Whiley? I think they're both great broadcasters in their own right. But they were a complete disaster as a double act, and it actually resulted in him leaving the BBC. So I think the BBC is prepared now to put wokism and to put diversity ahead of actually what the audience want, and also just who's best to do the job.
That may be right, but I do know that Simon, particularly, he had his afternoon show that was always excellent. I was on it a couple of times and enjoyed it. I liked Simon very much, but I know that he had had enough. He was finding it a bit of a strain. I think he was quite happy to be able to leave it when he did. But they do get it wrong, the BBC. They get it wrong quite often. I mean, look at the wonderful Sue Barker. I mean, she's storming it, running Wimbledon at present, being absolutely marvellous, full of energy and life. She's actually at the top of her form, I would say. Now, it's said that she is standing down, and it's her choice. Well, that may be the case. Well, I don't believe it was the case that she wanted to stand down from Question of Sport. She was marvellous in that terrific programme, absolutely marvellous.
That was a disgraceful decision.
Well, a terrible decision. Now, if you've seen the show, well, are you watching the show now? I can't. I find it absolutely.
No way.
I think it's dreadful.
And I did watch it with Sue Barker, actually, in the past. Mike Reid, what do you know about Scott Mills? And how difficult is it going to be for him now? Because he inherits Steve's audience, who aren't going to exactly be delighted to have this bloke there.
Yeah, well, I said it when Steve took over. They thought, who is this guy? You know, because he was doing strange and different things, introducing characters, catchphrases, that very American style. And they were sort of quite against that for quite a while until he won them over. And I guess Scott will do the same. I mean, he's been on there standing in for Ken Bruce. So, you know, he knows what it's about, safe pair of hands. And I guess what you do is get in there, you know, steady the tiller, you know, don't bump into the bank too much, and then just gradually expand yourself, you know, as a person. Just be a nice guy. You can't go on and be another Steve Wright, because Steve was unique in the way that he wrapped things up and presented them. That was his particular talent of being able to bring in quite ordinary things and wrap them like Christmas presents and give them to you like gifts. I mean, he's very, very clever. I mean, we started together and we did characters in the very, very early days, very rough and fun. But, you know, we got fired on a weekly basis. Our boss, Neil French-Bake, said, you boys are amateurs, I'm firing you. We said, what have we done? He said, that's it. You haven't done anything. But we were just, you know, rebellious. We had our own playlist and, you know, and we somehow came through. We stuck with it. We were told to listen to other people and do what they did. And we thought, actually, that's a bit boring. We'll do our own thing. And we did. Luckily, we kind of got away with it. And I was still kind of getting away with it.
Well, look, it's been great to have you here. Our BBC legends, what a trio. Former BBC Radio 1 DJ Mike Reid, ex-B presenter Peter Purvis, and former Radio 1 and Radio 2 presenter David Hamilton. So who do you agree with on this? Was the BBC wrong to replace Steve Wright with Scott Mills on Radio 2? Sean on Twitter says, Steve Wright is Mr. Afternoon Radio. It's not going to be the same without him. From Toby, Steve is great, but so is Scott. Things change and nothing stays the same forever. If Scott was a terrible broadcaster, he wouldn't have been on Radio 1 for 25 years. And Dave on email says, the BBC has form on this. They did the same to Sue Barker, as Peter just mentioned, actually, when they replaced her with a younger presenter on A Question of Sport. And your verdict is now in. 76% of you agree that the BBC was wrong to replace Steve Wright with Scott Mills. 24% of you agree with the decision. Coming up, as the president of Brazil reveals why he didn't take the COVID jab, will the first major world leader speaking out in this way encourage more debate around the efficacy of vaccines? Neil Oliver hopes so. He's tonight's Outsider at 9:50. But first, what does Britain's vote leave Harrow make of slippery Starmer's alleged plan to, quote, make Brexit work? Nigel Farage's verdict, you don't want to miss it. He's live after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation. We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GBNews,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Unfiltered opinion on COVID vaccines from Neil Oliver and Mark Stein coming up. But it's time now for What the Farage. As we discussed at the top of the show, Keir Starmer has unveiled Labour's so-called 5-point plan to make Brexit work, which I've taken with a sizable pinch of salt. Here's another snippet of slippery Starmer's smoke and mirrors speech at the Centre for European Reform earlier tonight.
There are some who say we don't need Brexit to work. We need to reverse it. I couldn't disagree more. Because you can't move forward or grow the economy or deliver change or win back the trust of those who've lost faith in politics if you're constantly focused on the arguments of the past. We can't afford to spend all of our time looking back over our shoulder, because all the time we're doing that, we're missing what is ahead of us. So let me be very clear. Under Labour, Britain will not go back into the EU. We will not be joining the single market or the customs union. Now, I know that some people don't want to hear that, but it's my job to be frank and to be honest. And you'll always get that from me.
Oh, yeah. This is a man, of course, who led Corbyn's push to overturn democracy and hold a second referendum. So, Nigel, the architect of making Brexit happen, can we really trust anything that Starmer and Labour say on Brexit, especially given we've seen what Sadiq Khan says this week, we've seen what Tony Blair says this week?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. But remember what this is all about. You know, Brexit proved to be a disaster for the Labour Party. The North London dominated Labour Party couldn't conceive that 4 to 5 million of their own long-term voters would desert them on this issue, would desert them in the 2015 general election, desert them in the referendum, and then, when they tried their best to overturn it, then actually moved to Boris Johnson. And so this is a shout out to the Red Wall. It's a big, clear message. We will not rejoin the EU, the customs union, or the single market. So I get what he's doing. Now, would it quell dissent within the party amongst the internationalists, as they call themselves, the globalists, as I prefer to call them? Well, certainly not. No, it won't do that for a moment. But I get what he's doing. Dan, basically, this is make Brexit boring. Try to get Brexit out of the Labour voters' minds, get them focusing on Boris Johnson's government, its errors, its unforced errors that it keeps making, it seems, every single week. So I think from a political point of view, it's actually quite a clever speech. The problem is, as with everything with Starmer, there's no substance. Make Brexit work was the slogan. Well, what is it? It's a few changes to veterinary products, to agriculture. I mean, it's very, very technical stuff. I get what he's doing. It's a red wall shout out. Will it work? The trouble he's got is that nothing he ever says is memorable. Nothing he ever says gets repeated in the cab. Nothing he ever says gets told to me by a black cab driver. It's just the way he delivers it. But maybe, and we should think about this here at GB News, maybe being boring, maybe being dull at the moment is a bit of an asset compared to the chaos that we see in number 10.
Well, I have to say, I was falling asleep just then with Starmer's monologue. I was like, we need to get Farage on ASAP because people will be hitting the off button on their remote. So I completely agree with you on that. I guess the other point of view on this speech, though, Nigel, is it's going to absolutely tear apart the left and the centre of the Labour Party yet again. I mean, even today, Sadiq Khan again saying, no, we can still deliver Brexit and join the single market.
Yes, the pressure for the single market is there. And if you work on the basis that it's unlikely, even given the fact that I think the Tories are heading for a disaster, but I think it's unlikely that Labour can get an outright majority. Very unlikely indeed, given the arithmetic. They would, of course, have to go into bed with the Liberal Democrats, probably the SNP too, both of whom do want to rejoin the single market. So he can say what he wants today, but the political reality of putting together a government would be very different. And let's face it, he ain't going to put it to a referendum. I mean, that isn't going to happen. So this is one of those policies, one of those statements where you could, in government, see a U-turn. But I do expect him, as much as he can, to stick to the big statements today. If he doesn't, he's sunk in the red wall.
And how terrified should we be of Sir Tony Blair behind the scenes pulling the strings, Nigel?
Do you know what? I'm not that terrified. I mean, I think, Blair has, post being Prime Minister, carved out a very successful career on the global stage, especially in Africa and continents like that, where he's made millions and millions and millions. His political stock in the UK is pretty low. And he can get together for his little conference last week, and he can be popular amongst that group. He is not popular. In fact, he's extremely unpopular with the British public. And the more he's seen as a puppet master, the more damage I think he would do to the Labour brand.
Yeah, that is a very good point. I guess the issue is that Starmer doesn't have many original ideas, Nigel, and he turns a lot to Mr. Blair.
Yeah, well, Blair, I mean, Blair's a thinker. The trouble is the conclusions are nearly always wrong and damaging, but he is a thinker. He's also, and he was a great orator. We must give him credit for that. He was a great orator. Yeah. I mean, even the music, things can only get better and all the rest of it. Starmer's got none of those qualities. He is, quite rightly, as you say, as dull as ditch water. But, they talk about a coalition of chaos. Well, it's number 10 that's in chaos. So what Starmer has done in the last few days is to say, no deal with the SNP, no rejoining the single market. Big, clear, shout-out messages. They may well get broken in the fullness of time. He may well have internal dissent on the single market issue amongst many of his MPs and senior figures, such as Khan. But do you know what? Actually, he's playing it quite well. I mean, the extreme left are now invisible. He's done that. He's trying to box off Brexit to say, look, we accept it now. We're not going to look backwards. We're going to look forwards. And he's trying his utmost to get rid of the SNP scare. He may not be able to deliver anything, but in some ways, as a manager of where Labour's going, he's not doing that badly.
OK, Nigel Farage on what he thinks is a canny political calculation from slippery Starmer tonight. Nigel, thank you so much. Great to chat. But coming up, as the MSM launch a new scare campaign and COVID doom-monger Jenny Harries calls for the return of new draconian health restrictions, are we being readied for another round of vaccines? We'll debate in the Media Buzz at 10. But first, with world leaders Now, questioning the efficacy of the vaccine and debating bodily autonomy, has the door finally been opened to those important conversations? Neil Oliver breaks down the president of Brazil's extraordinary vaccine admission. He's the outsider straight after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages coming up. But Neil Oliver is tonight's outsider. Rarely have we seen world leaders refuse to toe the party line on COVID vaccines. But in a sensational interview with US television host Tucker Carlson, firebrand Brazilian President Bolsonaro has explained in detail just exactly why he remains unvaccinated. In his bombshell chat with the Fox News host, he made the case for natural immunity, fancy that, and early COVID treatments, while also raising concerns about Pfizer's contract demands that it's not liable for side effects or deaths caused by their jabs. The manufacturer was accused of holding Brazil to ransom over the lawsuit preventing waiver, which it said was a common feature of pharmaceutical deals. Look.
Why didn't you take the vaccine?
Now, someone who contracts the virus like I did, the vaccine doesn't really help. You don't take a vaccine if you have already been contaminated. The vaccine would be innocuous. You should rather take the medication. And in Brazil, of course, I studied the issue. I called other countries, including in sub-Saharan Africa, and Brazilian doctors and physicians, because there were people out there who either did not catch the virus, or when they did catch the virus was not strong enough to send them to the hospital or to kill them. And in Brazil, we saw the emergence of two medications that began to be used more widely. I myself took them when contaminated. But the global pressure all over the world from the media outlets and from the pharmaceutical companies, they were all against the early treatment. They actually focused on the vaccine. I read Pfizer's contract, and one of the clauses said, "We shall take no responsibility whatsoever for any side effect arising from the vaccine." I became concerned about that.
So Neil Oliver, it's crazy, isn't it, that the idea of bodily autonomy is so controversial, but that's where we're at, with COVID at least. With a world leader opening this sort of discussion, do you think we might see a healthier debate around the efficacy of vaccines and the right to choose now?
Dan, I would like to think so. I think it's as you say, it's very important and very significant that someone like Bolsonaro has come forward and said that he didn't take the vaccine and that he was, you know, the whole thing was just common sense. I think all of it, if you watch the whole interview with Tucker Carlson, I think the whole piece it sounds like common sense to any reasonable person. You know, he talks about the fact that he watched the pandemic develop, and then he saw the vaccines becoming available, and he saw the necessity for early treatment. And that he's spoken about the fact that he regrets not that the early treatment was not brought to bear to save more lives. And I think basically, yes, as you say, what it does is that a world leader coming forward and opening all of that up means that the rest of us can feel a lot more confident and empowered to have that conversation amongst ourselves. Yes, I think it's very important that we continue and go forward to have that conversation about the mistakes that were made, because mistakes were made.
Indeed, and Neil, he obviously specifically raises early treatment and the drugs ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which have been very controversial. So I wanted today to see what our government now says about those two early treatments. So this is what the Department of Health and Social Care told me. They said ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are currently not approved in the UK for the treatment of COVID-19. However, clinicians may prescribe unlicensed medicines if there is no suitable licensed available alternative that is capable of meeting their individual patient needs. Now, again, this is not something the Department of Health has advertised, Neil, but to me, I don't know if you reading into that feel the same thing, but to me, that feels like they are slowly moving towards the point where they might consider these two early treatments.
Well, Bolsonaro said within that longer piece with Tucker Carlson that he regretted that early treatment had not been prioritised. He lamented that many deaths, thousands, hundreds of thousands, who knows how many deaths could have been prevented if early treatment had been sought, rather than waiting for the vaccines. And he highlights ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. I can tell you, Dan, when I had COVID in November last year, and I took ivermectin, I was able to source ivermectin, and within 5 days, 6 days, I was fine. I had overcome the symptoms of COVID-19. I'd had a positive test for COVID-19. I took ivermectin, and I was fine. And I think it's absolutely the case that he is right to say that early treatment should have been followed, and there has been a crime against humanity. The early treatment, rather than waiting for the vaccine, early treatment should and could have been followed for goodness knows how many people. And the fact that it wasn't, and the fact that it was taboo to talk about these subjects, the fact that it was taboo to talk about these medicines. Bolsonaro talks about the fact that it is the case that down through history, repurposing of medicines, the accidental discovery of cures, that has been part of the story of how we have treated disease. And I think simply the fact that Bolsonaro has brought this forward. Bolsonaro is a world leader. He is the leader of Brazil, and the fact that he is saying these things absolutely makes it the case that we have to have that debate now. We should have had the debate a year and a half, 2 years ago, but he has made it absolutely appropriate that we talk about these things now.
Well, let's hope we do, Neil. I have a feeling we're probably the only news channel talking about Bolsonaro's interview here in the UK. But we will have the debate here on GB News, and let's hope the rest of the media catches up, eh?
Absolutely, Dan, yes.
Neil Oliver, thank you so much, Neil. It's 10 p.m. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, as he tries to make voters forget his attempts to overturn the biggest Democratic vote in history. Can we ever trust Keir Starmer on Brexit? We'll debate at 10:50 as the Labour leader finds himself in the running for tonight's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass, thanks to the nominations of my superstar panel, the Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. As the MSM launch a new scare campaign and Jenny Harries calls for the return of measures including social distancing and face masks.
Routine things like washing your hands, keeping your distance, wearing a face covering if you're going into enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces.
It's the middle of July, Jenny. My God. Are we actually being readied for another rollout of vaccines? Is that what this is really about? We'll get into it next. Plus, ahead of his vaccine damage special coming up on Wednesday, I'll sit down with Mark Stein to discuss why these silenced victims of the pandemic aren't getting the full backing of the mainstream media. We'll learn more about the GBNews favourite's incredible backstory too. That's at 10:15. After Halifax prioritises pronoun badges and gender ideology over its loyal customers, why are corporations trying to shove wokism down our throats? Well, the former face of the bank, Howard Brown, gives his ex-employer a reality check and uncancelled. That's at 10:40. Also on the agenda, is it right to make single-sex toilets compulsory in new public buildings? And
I want to work in the arts, not disrupt them. But the situation we're in means that we have to do everything non-violently possible to prevent the civilizational collapse that we are hurtling towards.
I'd like to superglue them to a prison cell. As Just Stop Oil anarchists stage another gallery protest, which celebrity wokester has made an art of himself by supporting their antics? I'll tell you who in the media buzz. That's throughout the hour. We'll have tomorrow's newspaper front pages heading your way too. Hot off the press. But first, the news headlines at 10 with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Dan. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. Police have appealed to the public for help in finding a gunman after 6 people were killed at a 4th of July parade in Chicago. SWAT teams are still hunting the suspect who opened fire in a wealthy suburb. A high-powered rifle has been recovered from the rooftop of a building overlooking the parade. The suspect is thought to be aged between 18 and 20. Close to 30 people have been taken to hospital, including a child who is seriously injured. Mayor of Highland Park, Nancy Rotering, says the community has been torn apart.
Our hearts go out to the families of the victims during this devastating time. On a day that we came together to celebrate community and freedom, we're instead mourning the tragic loss of life and struggling with the terror that was brought upon us.
At least one person has died following a gas explosion at a block of flats in Bedford. 3 others were taken to hospital, with witnesses describing the scene in the Redwood Grove area as an inferno. One person was seen jumping from a second-floor window to escape the flames. East of England Ambulance Service says a man was airlifted with serious leg injuries. 2 other people, including a firefighter, were taken to hospital suffering from smoke inhalation. Labour's deputy leader says Boris Johnson should have properly investigated rumours about Chris Pincher before promoting him to deputy chief whip. It comes after Downing Street revealed the Prime Minister was aware of speculations but did not think it appropriate to block his appointment. Chris Pincher was suspended from the Conservative Party and resigned after claims emerged that he'd groped 2 men last week. 6 new allegations have come to light since, all of which Mr Pincher denies. Angela Rayner says Boris Johnson should have asked questions.
I mean, it sounds like a logical thing to do, but you ask, don't you? There's rumours flying around. Can I ask you the question, is there anything that you've done that could be considered? And I would have investigated them. If I was the Prime Minister and somebody had said that, I'd have said, you know, these rumours, that's really serious. I want to investigate it and I want to find out if there's any truth to it. I think that's a logical thing.
And Liz Truss says Britain and the free world have a duty to do whatever it takes to support Ukraine in rebuilding its economy as quickly as possible. Speaking at a recovery conference in Switzerland, the Foreign Secretary said President Zelensky wants the UK to champion the recovery of the capital Kyiv and the surrounding region.
We will push for immediate investment and to drive economic growth, because it's absolutely imperative we get the Ukrainian economy going. We need to be able to support returning Ukrainians to Ukraine. We need to give people hope about the future, and we need to give them the means to be able to support themselves.
We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Dan Wootton tonight.
Tomorrow's news tonight now in our media buzz. The first front pages are in. They're hot off the press as ever. Let's go straight to them. The Metro leads with today's Go Slow protest, where vehicles crawling at less than 30 miles per hour, gridlocked motorways over rising fuel prices, pictured as some drivers having a kickabout on the M4 as they faced hour-long delays. And The Sun report and an exclusive that a Premier League international footballer has been arrested on suspicion of rape after 6 police cars swooped on a North London address. The player, who is in his late 20s and is due to play at the World Cup in Qatar in November, was detained this morning and is currently in custody, according to the newspaper. My superstar panel back with me now, the Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and the former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. It's only July and the COVID doommongers already rearing their hysterical heads. So Dr. Jenny Harries, one of the UK's most senior official health officials, not sure why she's still in that job, but anyway, she warned yesterday that a current wave of the virus hasn't peaked and urged Brits to return to the dark days of muzzles and social distancing.
I think the advice is still the same. We want people to take sensible precautionary advice. So, routine things like washing your hands, keeping your distance, wearing a face covering if you're going into enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces. But we're still encouraging people to go about their normal lives, but in that precautionary way.
Sorry, Jenny. There's nothing routine about social distancing and wearing a muzzle. I mean, you go to any of our major cities, go to any airport, how the hell do you expect to do that? And why? This is the middle of summer, for God's sake. I thought sort of extremists like her might wait until at least October. Despite hospital numbers falling between April and June, Harries also claimed it's quite likely hospitalisations will rise higher than much as Omicron wave. But we can't fall into the trap of being manipulated and controlled by dodgy modelling from doomsday scientists who got it all wrong first time around. Of course, the media also playing their part in whipping up the COVID hysteria. They miss it so much. Here's BBC presenter Sophie Rayworth increasing the growing pressure for the vaccine rollout to be extended further.
Are we going to get lots more people being vaccinated? There's already talk of boosters for the over 65s. Is that going to be extended right through at least to the over 50s and further?
GPs, I think, have received that initial activation, if you like, now for a autumn booster for the elderly, so 65 plus, those adults in care homes and vulnerable adults.
So just unnecessary scaremongering from the BBC. But are we being readied for another rollout of vaccines? And Carol Malone, how would you feel? I mean, you're not in the age group she's talking about, but you are in the age group that Sophie Rayworth was pushing for. How would you feel about, I mean, you've had COVID now. How would you feel about being asked to have a fourth jab?
I really am in two minds about this. I couldn't wait to get the first 3. I mean, I was right in there for that. And things did happen to me after I had the third one. I mean, when you get older, it says one of the repercussions can be joint pain. I do get a bit of that now. But I'm just thinking, do I want to get into this, cycle? And I'm not sure I do. But,
Has it got natural immunity?
Well, the natural immunity thing hasn't worked as well as they thought it would, the herd immunity thing. But, I can't believe women like her. I just, does anyone remember when Jenny Harris, at the start of the pandemic. She actually waved it all off and said, oh, it'll come, and then it'll peak, and then it'll go away. Got that wrong. She also told us, she said, do you remember she said as well, she told us not to worry about it. You remember Italy was having a terrible time, and she said, oh, that won't happen here because our health service is much more prepared for it than Italy was. Well, she got that wrong as well. And then she got everything wrong that mattered, and then she got promoted to a higher position. And I don't want us to be a society, a masked society. I'm not interested. Even though, I mean, I don't think about COVID anymore. No, I shouldn't perhaps say that, but because I knew we were doing this today, I checked some of the figures. So in England now, there are less than 10,000 people in hospital. There are 2 and a bit million people who have been infected, but less than 10,000 in hospital, and only 219 who have needed the help of a ventilator. People need those things when they have a bad flu or when they have pneumonia. This is not killing the way it was at the start of the pandemic. And I just think we've got to, what does living with COVID mean to these people? Living with COVID is, getting it. You maybe be a bit ill like you'd be with flu. It's not rushing to social distance and wearing masks. And we've got to get over this feeling. But, do you remember she came out before Christmas last year and she said that people shouldn't be mixing if they didn't have to? And Boris actually he slapped her down, do you remember? He said, that's not what we're saying. So these scientists have got to be brought under control, I think. They can't be just telling people all
Benjamin Butterworth, you spent about 2.5 years locked in your home for a virus that had absolutely no chance of giving you any more than the sniffles. Do you feel stupid now?
Yeah, well, it's like, why did you marry the millionaire, Paul Daniels? Thanks for that open question. Look, I mean, I'm absolutely proud that I did my bit to keep other people safe, and I think the question really
have you not seen the have you not seen the damage of lockdown?
What I've seen is the number of deaths that were clearly saved, the number of infections that didn't happen by staying in your home when it was necessary, by wearing masks when it was encouraged, and by getting the vaccines. And the vaccines were the way out of it. So will I be wearing a mask routinely or social distancing? No, I don't think that's the world we're in, and thank goodness for it. But I say thank goodness, thank the vaccines. And that's why...
Would you have a fourth vaccine?
Hang on, that's why I think it's really important that the government has a rollout of vaccines so that everyone that is in a vulnerable category or an age group, the older age group, over 50s, I'd say, should be able to access. Well, I mean, there's probably finite access to them, and as someone who doesn't have any serious vulnerability, I probably, would...
If it was made available to you, would you?
If it was made available, I would have a fourth vaccine, yes. But do I think that I should get priority? No.
Why?
Why?
You have one?
Because I worry about the fact that the effects of the vaccines have worn off, given it
but they don't. They
well
don't
over a year since I had my third one.
Vaccines don't stop transmission.
They do. They reduce the transmission by a third, and that's become clear, and that's much better than nothing. But more importantly,
if they reduce
they slash the chance of getting seriously ill or dying. And the truth is,
no risk
there are a lot of people, there are a lot of elderly people, a lot of people with vulnerabilities who should be getting the vaccine.
I'm not talking about an elderly vulnerable person.
Do you think Benjamin hiding away has made his legs that colour? Do you think?
Oh my goodness! Can we take a look at that? I think I need sunglasses.
Have you seen legs that white your whole life?
Do you still think you're at the Pride Festival or something? You're on a national news show in shorts, you disgrace of a man.
I know, but I'm afraid I forgot my trousers, so it could have been even worse. Be glad I'm wearing them.
Not only did he forget his trousers, he spilled a bit of his dinner, his tomato pasta, on his shirt before he came in. So you're not looking your best, love. Really.
I'll wear a burqa next week.
Look, there they are. There they are.
They're beautiful prints.
They're not. They're really not.
Lucy, what do you make of all of this scaremongering, COVID scaremongering? The hysterics are back and the BBC seem to love it.
Of course they do. It's almost like they feed off it. There's a thrill, I think, that a lot of the people who have COVID derangement syndrome have. But this constant bombardment of contagion has psychological effects on people that are very, very damaging.
Look at Benjamin.
Look at Benjamin started. But I really mean this. It changes people and gives them serious mental health issues. So I really take umbrage at people that want to keep COVID fear on life support machines.
I feel sorry for Benjamin. He lost he lost over 2 years of his life. He is a young person who should have been out there
snogging.
living.
This is what's happening to our young. Can I just make a point?
I lost 2 years years and found 2 stones, so you win some, you lose some.
But it's all well and good adults discussing this. The real damage has been done to the young. You know, you have all these sort of hashtag do-gooders mental health people going on about the health of our, health of our young, while bombarding them with be frightened, be terrified, be risk-averse, be overcautious.
Final word, Benjamin.
Well, I was going to say, do you think that the elderly and vulnerable should be allowed to get their 4th vaccine?
Yeah,
Do you think you're hosting this show?
Well, this is a debate. Can you not answer the question?
I'm not answering your questions, no. No,
You've turned into a right politician.
Those Just Stop Oil eco-terrorists have been at it again. Spare a thought for art fans at the National Gallery in London who had a brush with these morons earlier today. An insufferable duo carried out the group's tried and tested stunt of supergluing themselves to an artwork before covering the piece by John Constable, which is over 200 years old, with a recreation of how oil will apparently destroy our countryside.
I want to work in the arts, not disrupt them. But the situation we're in means that we have to do everything non-violently possible to prevent the civilizational collapse that we are hurtling towards.
So far, so predictable. That attention-seeking stunt was far less dangerous, though, than what Just Stop Oil got up to yesterday, after 5 of their zealots stormed onto the Silverstone track during the British Grand Prix, endangering the lives of not just themselves, but drivers and spectators. Chinese driver Zhou Guanyu was involved in a horrible crash beforehand, which meant the drivers had slowed down and were able to dodge the protesters before they were dragged off by officials. Thankfully, Joe came away uninjured, but take a look at the kind of danger these fools were putting themselves in. Now, anyone with any sense slammed Just Stop Oil for such a dim-witted display. But of course, the virtue-signalling ignoramus and supposed race-hate victim, Gary Lineker, couldn't resist showing off his woke credentials, coming out in support of the activists by saying there was way more risk of death with climate change than attempting to delay a motor race. If it's not already too late, history will look back very favourably on these people. Wrong again, Gaz. If it's not already too late, let's lock up these criminal cretins before they cause someone else to die. And that is what we're heading towards, mark my words. Belinda DeLucy, Benjamin Butterworth, Carol Malone, do stand by, because coming up, is it right to make single-sex toilets compulsory in new public buildings? I'll debate with my superstar panel when our Media Buzz returns at 10:30. But first, why has the British mainstream media ignored the victims of vaccine damage? I'll sit down with GB News favourite Mark Stein ahead of his unmissable vaccine damage special coming up here on Wednesday. We'll also find out more about the incredible backstory of this GBN favourite too.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well.
I feel like I could take on the world.
Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
More of tomorrow's newspaper front pages coming up, but I'm delighted now to be joined in the studio by a very talented friend and colleague who's fast becoming a national favourite thanks to his brilliant work fighting for COVID vaccine justice. So for months now, Mark Stein has been giving a voice to those injured, maimed and even killed following COVID jabs after they struggled to get their tragic stories heard by the mainstream media. Having started his broadcasting career aged just 14, he's only a few years older than that now, and spending decades fighting against the establishment, he's won an army of fans here at GB News thanks to the hard-hitting debate, analysis and good humour that makes his shows unmissable. Now he's gearing up for a vaccine special on Wednesday, which I'm very excited to be appearing on too. And Mark is live with me now. I've finally dragged you into the studio, Mark, thanks to this vaccine damage special. But this is something you're incredibly passionate about, and it is something that has been ignored, Mark, by all the other channels here in the UK.
And the funny thing is, I've become kind of stubborn about it, because when we first interviewed the first two young ladies, widowed in their 30s, and that's a horrifying thing. You know, it's tough being widowed in your 80s or 90s, but when you lose half a century because of a medical intervention, and then certain other fellows in the media dismissed them as yesterday's news. Well, it would only be yesterday's news if you'd covered them yesterday, but you didn't cover them yesterday, you're not covering them today, and you've got no plans to cover them tomorrow. So it's simply because there are a lot of people in this situation, and the BBC and Sky News and whatever that other talk radio, whatever it's called, none of them are doing this story, so somebody has to.
And it's fascinating, Mark, isn't it? Look, there's some of the people who
that's Vicky, who lost the love of her life, and you know, Vicky has been on our show 3 or 4 times. Yeah, there he is, Lord Zian. They were like a rock music guy, and I'm pretty much a sort of effete, easy listening ninny. So I'm not too much into the hardcore rock, but they were, and they had a terrific life, and they don't deserve to have it taken away from them, and then for Vicky to be totally ignored.
And Mark, it's fascinating. This is now something that is being discussed in day-to-day life. Carol Malone, just on our Superstar panel there, she was, you know, a self-proclaimed massive fan of the vaccines. She says her arthritis and joint pains has got far worse after the 3rd jab. In my own life, a 26-year-old friend of mine who has myocarditis as a result of one of the jabs, currently experiencing 170 beats per minute heart rate on a regular basis, and feels completely let down because, of course, the government said you're doing the right thing. Now the government isn't providing the healthcare to help with that heart condition.
Well, no, the thing about your 26-year-old friend is if you're a guy of 26...
This is a woman, actually.
Oh,
yes,
a woman.
I know it's...
a woman of,
I know it's more prevalent in men, but this is interesting. It's a young woman.
If it's true for women, whether you're 26, male or female, you have no reason to get these shots. No. They don't do anything for you. They're completely ineffective with every increasing shot. We learn more about this every week. They do damage to your immune system, so they'll make it more likely you'll get something else. And the idea that the media are still in 2020 propaganda mode on this stuff. You know, I don't want to pick out names of any of these people, but a lot of them are very big names, and they all decided just to become pom-pom girls for these vaccines, and they should never have done that. And because of that, they don't want to back off it.
No. And they don't want to ask the tough questions because you're right. I mean, the newspaper, there was a newspaper said that were part of the campaign to get the country jabbed. So this special is going to bring a lot of these victims together for the first time in person, Mark.
Yes, and these are people that I was told didn't exist. But, I hear, because once you interview two, you start hearing from dozens more who said, oh, I never, because they've been kept in isolation, like these illnesses, like Guillain-Barré syndrome, which was very rare. They're in hospital. They don't know there are other Guillain-Barré sufferers out there because the media doesn't discuss it. So we're going to bring a room full of them together for the first time. You've spoken to other victims on your show. This is actually an unfolding disaster, and the consequences of it are going to be with us for years to come.
And of course, by the way, because of all of the deals that were struck, it's us who is paying the compensation via the government. And maybe that's one reason why the government has been so reluctant and is only starting now to compensate. But the point is, Mark, £120,000 for the loss of your fiancé, £120,000 for the loss of your leg. I mean, it doesn't stack up.
No, and these are companies that are making a fortune off these things. And on the British end, they've been given knighthoods and damehoods. So the £120,000 is nothing. But also because there is Sajid Javid, who won't come on the show, but he's still out there saying, you got to get your fourth jab, your fifth jab, however many it takes. We shouldn't be saying that now, and we certainly shouldn't be recommending, as in America, that 6-month-olds get this thing.
No, I mean, vaccines for children, that is a whole other issue. But Mark, let's talk about you now, because you have had a fascinating path in your career before ending up here at GBNews. So 14 years old was your first broadcasting stint.
Yeah, I was on Capital Radio in London, and they used to have a young disc jockey spot on Sunday afternoons, a show called Hullabaloo. It's very different from the way Capital is now, and I fancied having a go at it. And I was probably trying a bit too hard then. I remember they had a record called Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation. And I came off the back of it and said, don't rock the boat, baby, 'cause you ain't hip if you tip the ship. Now, you could get away with that line, but me at 14, I couldn't.
But your love of music has remained to this day. And of course, for us regular viewers, it's a part of your show. Sometimes you even break out into song, even now, Mark.
Well, no, I always get asked about it. I mean, in a happy world, I would just be, playing records at 2 in the morning on CZZZ in Timmins, Ontario, and be perfectly happy doing it. But one thing I learned actually since 9/11, when you look at the way music was forbidden in Afghanistan under the Taliban. When ISIS were rampaging around, they would behead musicians in North Africa and the Middle East. So you think, actually, even the small pleasures in life, like going into some London cocktail bar and there's a little pianist tinkling away, even those small pleasures have to be defended, and they're part of the great defence of civilization.
Indeed. It was funny, actually. I watched a clip of you the other night, which one of my brilliant viewers sent from Channel 4 many, many years ago. You did a big culture-type show for Channel 4, didn't you?
Yeah, I used to... It's very odd for me to look back on that. Once upon a time, my sister was at the BBC, and she was standing in the corridor, and two people came by, two big shot producers, and they said, what we need for this show is the new Mark Stein. And at that time, the old Mark Stein was like 27. So I was thinking, whoa, this is, So when people find these clips on YouTube of the old Mark Stein, half a lifetime ago.
And that was eye-opening for me. And then, of course, Daily Telegraph, which is really where, I guess, you sharpen your political antenna, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I subscribe to that sort of keep moving thing, that you can wear out your welcome very easily. So I always used to like I thought, oh God, you know, the old Mark Stein who's washed up here in the UK. I'll tell you what, I'll go try Canada for a couple of years. That shouldn't be too difficult. Maybe Australia. I don't think I've ever. I don't think I've ever made it to New Zealand. But you know, I'm pretty big. Actually, I'm big in the Solomon Islands for a reason I don't fully understand.
Well, they love your show on YouTube, don't they? But Mark, you're not going anywhere. You've got to stick around at GB News, please.
No,
for a good while yet, because there's important issues at stake.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what GB News. I'm astonished at the sort of lockdown groupthink. I look at all these guys, even the guys who pretend to be different, are all saying the same thing, and that's the thing about GB News, is to expand that shrunken, shriveled public discourse there.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for working late tonight. I feel very guilty because I know how much prep you do. But, of course, that vaccine damage special is going to be here at 8 p.m. on GB News. It really is going to be unmissable. Of course, we will always get both sides of the story here at GB News. And a UK government spokesperson says they are working through claims made to the vaccine damage payment scheme as quickly as possible, and all vaccines have undergone robust clinical trials to meet standards of safety, effectiveness and quality. Coming up, why are corporations ignoring their customers and trying to shove wokism down our throat? The former face of Halifax, Howard Brown, is uncancelled and taking his ex-employer to task for prioritised pronoun badges and gender ideology over its loyal customers. The next, with gender-neutral facilities on the rise, is it right to make single-sex toilets compulsory in new public buildings? My superstar panel debate that. As the Media Buzz returns next, we'll have more of tomorrow's newspaper front pages ready and waiting too.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio,
On digital, absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Let's return to tomorrow's News Tonight now in our Media Buzz. Lots of front pages in now. The Guardian leads with calls for Parliament to stop the, quote, seemingly endless allegations of sexual misconduct by cross-party MPs. Unions representing more than 1,000 parliamentary workers have written to Speaker Lindsay Hoyle urging him to take action over the most recent case involving Tory MP and ex-Deputy Whip Chris Pincher. The Eye reports that Boris Johnson's cabinet are unhappy at having to come to his defence over his handling of previous allegations about the behaviour of Pincher. Some ministers and aides have reportedly been unwilling to back the PM. The Independent also covers the Pincher scandal, reporting that the PM was told of the allegations on at least 2 occasions. Boris was allegedly given a first-hand account of inappropriate sexual behaviour before his appointment. The Daily Mail leads on calls from Priti Patel for police to use tough new powers to stop eco-terrorists from bringing our roads to a halt. Yes! The Home Secretary said officers should arrest and charge drivers behind so-called go-slow protesters. I say absolutely. The Daily Express leads with promised national insurance reform for 30 million people struggling with the cost of living crisis. Boris Johnson has vowed it will ease financial burdens during tough times and help rebuild the economy. The Daily Telegraph leads on Keir Starmer clashing with his party after pledging to make Brexit work. He's reportedly facing a Labour revolt after promising not to take us back into the single market in today's keynote speech. And the Daily Star covers a horrible new twist in the cost of living crisis. Hard-up smokers are turning to fake fags filled with insect eggs, funky, and other nasty surprises. Goodness gracious me. More on the Media Buzz now with tonight's superstar panel. Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, senior reporter at the newspaper Benjamin Butterworth, and former Brexit Party MEP Belinda de Lucy. Now, new public buildings will be required to include single-sex loos in a bid to curb the proliferation of gender-neutral facilities. Offices, schools, hospitals and entertainment venues are among the non-residential premises that will be banned from having solely unisex toilets under plans announced by Minister for Equality's Kemi Badenoch today. According to new building regulations and guidance, separate gender-neutral toilets should be provided only if there is space and should not come at the expense of female facilities. The government acknowledged that the rise in unisex toilets raised, quote, safety concerns from women who feel they are losing privacy and being unfairly disadvantaged. Confirming the move, which will be consulted on in the autumn, Badenoch said it is vital that women feel safe and comfortable when using public facilities and that their needs are respected. These changes will ensure that separate toilets for men and women are preserved at the same time as providing universal toilets for those that want them. This is a common sense approach. Belinda de Lucy, this feels absolutely necessary to me.
Of course. I mean, it's since the 1850s, women have been campaigning for their own public loo single-sex space, and it was fought against and fought against. Even the carriages and hansom cabs would run into the first female loos to try and destroy them because there was so much reaction towards women daring to leave their home and participate in public life, which, of course, public loos for women necessitate that. Women need their own spaces to participate in public life, and the trans zealots have been trying to take them away from women in this relentless attack on women and girls to help protect the feelings of people who are going through disorders that need care. They do not need to encroach on our rights. So women have been fighting a long time. We then had our single-sex spaces, and within the last 5 years, they've been taken away. Schools around the country have been erasing girls' loos for pupils. So girls have been staying at home when they have their periods instead of attending school because they don't feel safe or they feel like they have no dignity or respect for their privacy by having to experience their monthlies, if you like, in a school environment with boys giggling next door in the cubicles. I don't know any man who wants unisex loos over single-sex space loos either. This is not a women versus men thing.
Well, I've found one, though.
Yes.
I think I've found the only one in the country, Benjamin Butterworth, who seems to love them.
I don't think I've ever said that. I mean, the only place I know that has gender-neutral loos is GBNews.
Which is exactly, by the way, why I think this law is absolutely necessary, because this building that we are renting would be forced to have loos for women and loos for men. I am personally very much opposed to unisex toilets, including here.
Why do you like them so much, Benjamin?
I mean, I've never said that. I can't say it again. But do you know what?
Well, you don't agree with this policy from Kemi Badenoch, though.
It's really weird in the deepest economic crisis we've had for decades that there is a government minister who is obsessing over where some people pee. I mean, Belinda, where do you think they were peeing last year?
Why You're trivialising this. Little to you. You don't know what it's like being a girl at school or being a vulnerable woman in needing a safe space to run to.
I've never ever said they shouldn't have them in schools,
you've just said that it doesn't really matter because of cost of living, or why is it so important?
Where do you think they peed?
It matters to us.
Where do you think they peed before?
Where do I think they peed before? I've only ever known single-sex loos in nightclubs and bars.
So where do you think transgender women peed before?
I think there were a tiny amount of transgender
There
women
still are.
Well, now the trans spectrum has become so vast.
Where do you think
it
we peed
includes
before?
rapists and paedophiles and
Oh,
every
you are
sexual deviant.
disgusting.
No, I'm saying it now
How
includes
dare
that.
you say trans
And it-
people
and
are
it-
rapists
No, I didn't
and
say
paedophiles?
that.
She did not
I did
say
not
that.
say that.
You said they're rapists and paedophiles.
No, I said the
What a
trans
bigot.
spectrum has been expanded so much.
rapists and
And it does a
paedophiles?
huge disservice to
Does that match
genuine
Ofcom
trans
rules? Does
people.
that match Ofcom
No,
rules?
I didn't say that.
Did you listen
You're
to what Belinda
misquoting
said?
me.
You just said the trans spectrum is
Has
extended
been-
to rapists and paedophiles.
No, has extended to include the worst sexual deviants who hide under the
You're saying
umbrella,
it's gay?
which does a
Rapists and
huge
paedophiles.
disservice to trans women, a
But
huge
Benjamin,
disservice to the
should
trans
lesbians
community.
be banned?
Benjamin,
Should lesbians be
This is
banned?
so outrageous.
Should lesbians be
Putting
banned?
words into my mouth
Should
is
lesbians
so
be banned?
outrageous.
Of
You don't
course.
know
Should
what
lesbians be banned?
trans
Of course
extremism
not.
has
Should
hurt
lesbians
the
be
trans
banned?
community more than women
Should
wanting their
lesbians
safe
be
spaces
banned?
ever could.
There are rapist
Why have you brought lesbians into this, by the way?
Because she's saying that these people are going to target women. Well, should
No,
lesbians?
I didn't say-
Should
I said it-
bisexual
No, but
women be
Benjamin,
banned?
Benjamin, you must note there is evidence, Benjamin, of trans rapists, for example, in hospitals using that to rape women. There is evidence of that, Benjamin. This is not a made-up story. And so the
rapists don't need a door to stop them. People who are rapists are repugnant and heinous, and people who are rapists, you know, the man that raped the woman in Clapham, he didn't need to go into a female toilet. He needed to put on a police uniform. The man that raped those two girls in the 2000s, the Ian Huntley, he didn't need to go into a women's
But do you
toilet.
not understand?
He just needed to
No,
pretend to be a
Benjamin,
caretaker.
society has been conditioned
You know, the Tory
to
MP,
stop
Charlie
women
Elphicke,
complaining
didn't
about
need to go
men being in their
didn't need to go
bathrooms.
into a women's bathroom. He needed to look like a
course
respectable
not.
member of society.
Of course not.
So the idea
And
of,
there's lots of ways
the
to
idea of
protect women
pretending
in
that trans
society.
people
I'm
are
not saying
plagued by
trans people are. I'm saying the
paedophiles and
trans
rapists
spectrum
is
now shelters
disgusting.
them. You're completely misquoting me because you cannot defend the argument that the trans spectrum
Where
has
do you think
started to
transgender
include...
people peed 10 years ago?
Because there was a tiny minority of transsexuals
That's
then.
not an
Trans
answer.
now
There
means
still
someone
is
who
a
wants to
tiny.
be non-binary one week, someone who wants to be a girl the next week, someone who
Where do you think they
suddenly
peed?
identifies as a woman once he's been
I
convicted
feel
of
like
a sexual
Jeremy Paxman
crime
with
in
Michael
prison.
Howard. Where do you think they peed?
I think back then, are
We're
you
not
saying
gonna
it
get an
made women
answer.
comfortable back then? Because I've been in a loo before with transsexuals flashing, right? And you're saying that my experience is completely invalid and I'm
No, I didn't.
transphobic for having that experience.
Well, you are transphobic.
No, I am
But where do you
not,
think
because
they
I feel
peed? You just
protective
called them
over
rapists and
I feel
paedophiles.
protective over
No,
the
she-
genuine
Benjamin,
trans community
Benjamin, we
who are
have to
being
be-
slurred by trans
we have to
What do
be
you
no, but
think?
we have to be clear.
not fair.
You're saying that Belinda said that trans people were
a lie.
rapists.
She said the transfer has
She
been
didn't.
extended
No,
to
the
include
trans
rapists and
spectrum
paedophiles. Yes.
has been extended
Which
to
bit of
include...
that do you not understand?
So you're saying rapists who in prison who say they're women now are part of the trans community because if you
let's
don't,
just be
that's
clear.
transphobic.
I couldn't give a damn about
I know
rapists'
you- I know,
rights.
I know.
Rapists should be locked
Well, hang
up
on a
in
minute.
prison are disgusting. I don't care how they identify. That's not the issue. The issue is that you're demonising the regular
oh my
folk
God,
trying to
I'm
lead their lives.
I'm protecting the trans
Where do you
community
think
by not
trans
allowing
women
the
pee?
extremists to
Where do you think they
hijack
pee?
the narrative of the genuine trans community who suffer gender dysphoria.
Where do you think they pee?
Because now it's all become a cult and a fashion and it hides people with sexual deviances that use that door to access women's spaces.
Mini Mary
Don't
Whitehouse
lie
over
about
here.
what I said.
You know, where do you think they pee? I mean, this is that. So if you're saying they
Carol
can't,
Malone,
you're
Carol
saying they
Malone.
can't go there. Where
No,
do they go?
They should go in their own cubicles.
Where?
Not
Their
in
own-
women's.
So you want gender-neutral cubicles?
As alongside single-sex
So you
cubicles for
disagree
women.
with
No,
that?
okay.
Carol Malone.
You don't make any sense,
No,
Belinda Deluce.
Benjamin.
Carol Malone.
No.
Carol Malone.
What you did there was just... You changed what should have been a really sensible argument. You, not Belinda, you made this into a screaming match by twisting something that she said. She did not say that all trans were rapists and paedophiles. But the bottom line here is you've got to look at this in a common sense, where we have genuine evidence now that there are, for instance, schools in Scotland. The Times reported not too very long ago that girls were not using the toilet in schools because the boys were going into the gender-neutral toilets, they were kicking their sanitary products about, they were peeing in the bins. Girls had a thing about going into the toilets. We also have evidence that there are elderly people who go into toilets in a place where there have been guys who have been inebriated, they're drunk, they get scared. These elderly people are in the cubicle on their own, they're scared to come out. There was lots of evidence of fear and of people being scared. And you screaming at Belinda there and pretending she said something she didn't, it's taken away the very real concept. Because this is not about demonising men or demonising trans people. It's about safe spaces for women. That's what this whole thing is about.
So
And
guys,
women
no
are entitled to have
one
their
is saying,
safe
Benjamin,
space.
when you talk about male rapists, you're not saying, that's disgusting. It is all men are rapists. You're not making that point. So all Belinda was saying is that a tiny minority of trans people have used this lack of safe space in order to rape and parents want that prevented.
Can I also say,
the issue isn't the fact that they're trans. The issue is that they're a rapist.
But they're allowed cover. They're allowed cover.
Via the lack of a safe
Where
space.
do lesbians go? If you're making the argument that it has inappropriate...
Final word, Carol.
Where do lesbians
You've had a lot of space in this argument.
Final word, Carol. Final word.
We keep being told by the trans brigade and by trans activists that what we are doing, non-trans, is offending them by not letting them come into our talk. What about the majority of other people who are offended by what's happening? The majority doesn't seem to matter anymore, and they should.
OK.
Called tyranny.
Now, America's wokest politician, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has truly outdone herself in a recent Instagram post after she claimed that it was an act of, quote, resistance to get her nails painted red. In a bizarre spiel that even Gen Z would struggle to make sense of, AOC said she's using her manicure as a, quote, personal act of reclamation. Look.
I want to talk about personal acts of reclamation. Because sometimes people will say, there's nothing I can do, I can't do, I feel so powerless. And there is no act too small. And even today, I have a personal errand. I need to redo my nails. So I grew up in a pretty socially conservative environment. I couldn't really even paint my nails red until I pretty much graduated and left the house. And I think, like, as I've grown older, what it really is power. Powerful women. Bold women who do what they deem is best. That's how I'm choosing to reclaim it.
And she was true to her word. Because here are those defiant red nails in all their glory. You keep fighting the good fight, AOC. You're going to change the world with those personal acts of reclamation. Benjamin Butterworth, she must be too extreme even for you, right?
Well, when I come back next week with red nails, you'll know the answer.
I want you to reclaim your legs with a little bit of fake tan before.
I want him to cover his legs. I never want to see that again in my life.
I don't. I'll end up being a victim of racist abuse like Gary Lineker. You've got to be careful.
Lord.
Do you know, they're not just white, they're actually bruises. They've got bruises all over them. God knows what you've been doing.
From your insults out there.
I'm afraid that's you're the one insulting them. Not me.
Belinda DeLucy, stand by, because as he sets out to, quote, make Brexit work, despite previously attempting to overturn the biggest Democratic vote in our history, is slippery Starmer. A Greatest Britain or Union jackass today. My panel are split. I'll crown tonight's victors at the end of the show. But first, why are corporations like Halifax ignoring their customers and trying to shove wokism down our throats? The former face of the bank, Howard Brown, has a stern warning for his ex-employer over their aggressive pronoun badge push. That's coming up in mere seconds. First, though, a preview of tomorrow night's show.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, as the establishment bombards us with warnings of a new COVID wave, the man who popularised the term mass formation psychosis, Dr. Matthias Desmet, delivers a vital briefing on how to stop the nation once again falling under the spell of COVID hysterics. Plus, are illegal migrants causing a housing crisis? Daily Mail columnist Stephen Glover explores. And as ever, I'll break down the headlines of the day with my superstar panel. Former MEP and father of the Prime Minister, Stanley Johnson, former Daily Star editor and current columnist Dawn Neeson, and the author and journalist Rebecca Reed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
I'll crown my Greatest Britain and Union jackass next, but now it's time for Uncancelled. We're Britain's top commentators speak out on controversial issues without the fear of the cancel culture sweeping the rest of the media. Now, corporation wokism has officially spiralled out of control, with top British bank Halifax not only pushing pronoun badges, but completely dismissing customers' concerns by telling them to stuff it if they don't agree with their stance on gender ideology. How's that for inclusivity? But it's not just Halifax getting drunk on virtue signalling. HSBC also expressed support for Halifax's puzzling pronoun policy, taking the moral high ground despite their links to the Chinese Communist Party. Hundreds of senior employees were found to be members in a 2020 Telegraph investigation, by the way. And China's terrible human rights and LGBT record don't seem to matter. One man speaking out against Halifax's treatment of customers is branch worker turned noughties cult hero Howard Brown, who made a name for himself with a series of legendary commercials like these.
Extra, extra, I know you want more. I'll give you something extra when you walk through my door. Extra, extra, though I cannot deny. Terms and conditions apply. I'm giving it back to you, babe. Oh, it's the first and last, my extra thing. If you're renewing your home insurance and you want to save some dough, we could beat that quote and keep it down for 3 years in a row.
The days when Halifax used to be fun, but now Howard has a stern warning for his former employer about the danger of sacrificing customers on the altar of political correctness. So, Howard, you were the face of Halifax when none of this woke claptrap existed. Does it sadden you to see not so much what they were doing with the pronoun badges, although personally I think they're ridiculous, but the way that they just dismissed customers' concerns, like, you've got a different opinion to us, so you just leave the bank?
Absolutely. I mean, I was actually shocked when I first heard. I didn't actually believe it until and then when I got confirmation of it, I thought, oh. Yeah, really disappointing because Halifax, you know, we were the people's bank. We were the people's choice. So we considered ourselves a bit of a family and we wanted to encourage our customers to come into that family. From a banking point of view, I just think that they've got it wrong on this one, unfortunately. You know, the priority should always be the customers. And we worked so hard because we did some great work. I mean, I still have a fondness for Halifax. You know, I spent 11 years there and I had a tremendous time. And they do some great work. There's some great work for charities. But I just think on this one, I think they've got it just a little bit wrong.
And how we actually don't want banks getting involved in hot-button political and social issues, do we? It doesn't make sense.
Not at all. I just think that the bank should stick to what they're good at, which is, you know, putting their customers first, you know, serving customer needs and being available for them. And that's what we've always done. We've always done that as an organisation. We've always put our, you know, our customers first. I would like to think, to be honest, that somebody's going to have a little look at this and say, do you know what, I think we might have just got this one a little bit wrong. And reach out to the customers, because I know there's a lot of people out there really upset about this, and they're loyal customers that have been with Halifax for a very long time. So I'm hoping that somebody's going to have a look at this.
And how do you feel about these pronoun badges?
Well, I've got to be honest, if I wouldn't wear one, and that would just be a personal thing for me. I mean, I would wear my badge with the name Howard on, if I needed to, but I wouldn't have anything else because I'm not into sort of individuality. I'm thinking about the collective. I just think that everybody should be inclusive. I don't think we should, you know, go through separate individuals. So for me, I just particularly wouldn't want to wear one.
No, I mean, maybe it's bad for me to admit this, but I sort of judge someone if I receive an email, Howard, and, you know, at the bottom of the email, under their name, it says their pronouns. I just don't see the need.
No, I just think it's unnecessary. I think the focus should always be on its customers, because we know that our customers are the lifeblood of our organisation, and without them, you know, you have nothing.
No, indeed. Very well put. I hope they're listening to Halifax legend Howard Brown.
Bit of common sense.
Exactly. That's all we need. That's all we want. Thank you so much, Howard.
Thank you.
Time now to reveal today's greatest Britain and Union jackass. My superstar panel return. It's been a feisty one tonight, but, you know, we're all friends. We're all friends, right, guys? Hope you're still talking. Carol Malone, your greatest Britain nominee.
Who says we're friends? Anyway, mine is Sue Barker. She got a standing ovation at the weekend at Wimbledon. This is going to be her last tournament. She's been doing it for 30 years. You know, the BBC, the coverage for BBC, the coverage, She used to be on Question of Sport, remember? The BBC treated her pretty disgracefully, getting rid of her on that. And I was really happy to see that the viewers deserted the programme in their droves because of what they did to her.
Big time.
Yeah,
So
but
agree.
it was because she was older and they wanted to jazz it up, they
Agree.
wanted to woke it up, and they lost.
And now they've lost her altogether. Absolutely ridiculous.
But she's always been a fantastic ambassador for this country, both on and off the pitch.
Benjamin Butterworth, your Greatest Britain nominee.
Well, it's easy this week. It's Keir Starmer, the next British Prime Minister, because he became the, I don't know, shame you don't have the picture of him, they were so good, the first major party leader to march in a Pride event, the first in 50 years of them, and I thought that was a pretty great sign about the direction of the country.
Belinda de Lucy, your Greatest Britain nominee.
My Greatest Britain is Nadine Dorries for ensuring that little girls and women alike have their single-sex loos and defending girls from this relentless attack from gender ideologists.
OK, we're not going to have a fight about it, though. We're not going to have a fight about it now. But you're the winner, Belinda, because I think this was the right call by Nadine Dorries, and my goodness, if it means that I can get a single-sex space here at GBNews in the toilets, not our toilets, by the way, the building's toilets, I'm all for it. Carol Malone, your Union Jackass.
Mine is the Halifax Bank for its arrogant, condescending, passive-aggressive treatment of its customers last week, you know. I'm very much hoping, I was just asking Howard before we came in, if customers have left the bank. I'm hoping they're leaving it in their tens of thousands.
I've heard they are. Benjamin Butterworth, your Union Jackass nominee.
Mine is Chris Pincher, the guy who admitted to drinking too much in the groping accusation, and it's emerged tonight that Boris Johnson knew about serious accusations against him before making him deputy whip, and yet still he won't step down as an MP. People who behave like that shouldn't be in Parliament.
And Belinda de Lucy, your Union Jackass nominee.
My Union Jackass has to be Keir Starmer for treating the British public like fools and pretending he is King Brexit now, having spent years trying to overturn the vote and be doing everything he can to be as anti-Brexit as possible. We're not believing you, Keir.
Oh, my goodness. Did you just choose Keir Starmer as Union Jackass once you knew that Benjamin had chosen him
I
to
promise
be
you,
his
no, that was
Britain?
pre-prepared. It wasn't just trying to get Benjamin.
Mine was nearly Belinda.
Oh, my
That is
goodness.
an honour coming from you. That's
You're
a badge
at
of honour.
loggerheads tonight. You're at loggerheads tonight. But look, I've appreciated the debate. Oh, goodness, though, Benjamin isn't going to be happy because it's Belinda de Lucy with the double. Because, of course, Sir Keir Starmer is today's Union Jackass. I don't believe a word of what he said in that speech about Brexit. What that man wants is to overturn Brexit. He wants a second referendum. Thank you so much to my superstar panel, Carol Malone, Benjamin Butterworth, Belinda de Lucy. I'm back again tomorrow night from 9 p.m. Headliners is up next, though. Good night.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Showers easing overnight, fine for a time across Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland on Tuesday, but more rain turns up later in the day. The weather staying changeable in the north, drier further south as a ridge of high pressure begins to influence things a bit more this week. And so for some southern areas, no rain expected at all through the week, but there are showers to come for the north, and further showers are expected for northern and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, North Wales overnight. They will eventually mainly affect, say, northwest facing coasts with drier and clearer spells inland, and a cool night to come. Temperatures dipping in the single figures in some spots. But a bright start for the south and the east, and actually a fine day for much